So now that the interviews have been carried out, we're going to show you how we can process all of this information, given that we don't do any computerized statistic processing of this information, because we wish to preserve the qualitative nature of the content of the interviews, and that we wish to achieve a specific result, which is a typology. So the technique that we use is to select and classify the information in what we call an interview matrix. A matrix which is a grid, therefore. The theme of the study is still the same one. We want to know how local players and inhabitants perceive the evolution of meridional highlands landscapes. So it's around this theme that the interviews were carried out, with a few questions, but they were focused on this basic question. So if I've understood properly, our main question, research question, is the perception of local players and inhabitants in terms of the evolution of the meridional highlands landscapes. How many surveys do we have? We have 29 interviews. The sample was chosen based on characteristics that are available in the statistics, meaning the person's profession. For farmers, their technico-economic orientation, what we call the low-techs in agricultural statistics, or their function as representatives of groups or communities such as mayors or heads of trade unions. Do you think we can classify our interviews according to the activity of the players? Well, yes, in fact, I've set up an ID sheet where I gather together all of the interviews of the players according to activity. So we have 8 sheep farmers, 5 mixed, 2 cattle farmers, 2 horse farmers, 5 mayors, 3 old age pensioners, and 3 technicians. So we sorted the content of the interviews according to the 6 themes to respond to the initial problematics. So the 6 themes, first of all, characteristics of the players. So this first theme of the matrix, the first column of the matrix, we call it the characteristics of the players. And these are the characteristics available in the statistics or documents that are used to build our sample, meaning to build a list of people to interview for whom we believe they will cover this socio-economic diversity of a population. We will then see that we are seeking to obtain a new classification of this population, this time based on the results of the interviews. In this first column, we shall also put information gained during the interviews, in particular in this case, information relative to the different socio-political engagements of the people interviewed. For example, whether they belong to associations or their engagements as a trade unionist in farming or as elected representatives. So one theme that came out strongly that doesn't correspond to the initial order, but which was found in several interviews, concerns exodus and agricultural decline, then the evolution of landscape, then farming practices, activities, agricultural policies, tourism and gîtes, and problems and conflicts. To choose the themes of the matrix, we decided to focus on the themes of the order, which was the closing up of the landscape, farming activities, and from the interviews several themes came out, which was exodus and agricultural decline. These are themes which came back regularly, whereas we had not asked the question to the interviewees. Insofar as it is just a semi-structured interview guide. The questions are as open as possible and people express themselves freely. This is why we obtain information that was not planned at the outset. And this is where the interest of this type of interview resides. It is to let ourselves be surprised by non-provisioned information, by the relationship that people make between different themes. Whereas the scientific world, or people who ordered the study, strict the theme, for example here, to the state of the pasture lands and the way in which the population perceived the closing of the pasture lands. There were two new themes, therefore, that emerged. The first on rural exodus and demography, and the second on agricultural policies and the impact of subsidies in farming, always linked to the central theme, which is the closing of the pasture lands. There is another theme concerning tourism where all of the players are involved, be it the farmers, elected representatives or other players. And there is also a theme that includes problems and conflicts, where we group together everything concerning climate change, land issues, problems linked to wild boar and pine trees. So, to illustrate the theme of rural exodus, farmers are saying that the countryside is emptying and there is no longer anybody left to maintain the landscapes and no inhabitants on the highlands. So we set up a lexical field around this theme concerning demography, a declining population, abandon of activities and abandon of people of the territories. They prefer to go towards the towns, etc. So, to build the different columns of the matrix, we can see that we need keywords. Here we can speak of lexical field. And these keywords, this lexical field, is linked to a theoretical framework. It's extremely important to be linked to a precise theoretical framework that is explicit, meaning that we have voluntarily selected. For example, in other surveys, when we want to study the economic importance of an activity for a rural population, if we don't, before we set off for the survey, identify what the economic importance of an activity is, we might miss some important information. What is an important activity? Its importance in terms of income, or is it importance in terms of income safety? Is it in terms of flexibility of the working organization that allow you to lead other activities parallel to that? So the theoretical framework will, first of all, allow us to formulate the questions. We've already seen this. But also to relaunch the questions, to enrich the answer. And also not to miss important information whilst we are processing this information. Because we will be able to identify the keywords, we will be able to see in all of the fragments of the interview the elements which are important. So concerning agricultural policies, we've grouped together the lexical field of taxes, bonuses, Nature 2000, the LIFE program, everything that was of an administrative nature, and which also involved the CPIE. The CPIE was the ordering body of the study, and we find in the data processing as an object of the study. This was a voluntary choice, and it's often a choice that we make in human science surveys, meaning that the ordering body is in itself included within the scope of the study. So you saw, when you looked at the fragments of the beginnings of the interviews, that none of the groups said that they were coming in to do a study ordered by the CPIE. Why? Because in the order of the CPIE, there was a part of the request that can involve them themselves. The CPIE wanted to know locally what people thought of their activity, actions, support that the CPIE can provide, in particular for farming. So we couldn't come in under the umbrella of the CPIE, because we wanted people to be able to talk freely of the CPIE. And this is why we find it in this matrix now. Regarding tourism, for the farmers, that represented the diversification of their activity in the form of JITs within their farms. And concerning elected representatives, the advantage was the promotion of their territory with regard to tourist activity.
So on
the basis of the notes taken during the interviews, we now have to classify all of the interviews within the matrix according to the themes. So to identify the themes in the interview, I chose one color per theme: orange for farming activities, blue for rural exodus, yellow for tourism, green for pasture lands, and pink for policies. So for example, concerning rural exodus, children are not taking over. I highlight that in blue. It's jumped one generation. Main activity, sheep rearing, so 260 sheep, 392 hectares. The gîte, that concerns tourism also. And I'm putting a little bit of yellow there. Specific hiking trails for the gîtes, hiking, VTT, accommodation for each night. You leave from Clapier, hosting, and it doesn't seem to make much sense, this. So it's when we fill in the matrix that we realize the importance of the quality of the note-taking during the interview. So either the people were really talking too fast and we didn't have time to note it all down, or the note-taking did not respect the instructions for integral note-taking. But what we find ourselves is with bits of sentences that no longer have any meaning. And this is why we ask people to immediately reread the interviews to fill in the gaps that there might be in our notes, using the live memory of the interview. It's not after the 30th interview that we can fill in the gaps of the first interview 10 days before. So it's not very easy to classify, sort, and fill in the matrix with poor note-taking, as we can see. Note-taking must allow us, well, first of all, it must be complete, and it must allow us to re-travel through the thoughts of the person interviewed, which is constructed and comprehensible, even though there might be some hesitations in their speech. And it must also account for the way in which people express their ideas, the vocabulary, the precise vocabulary, the precise way in which they have expressed themselves. For example, if a person spoke about boxwood, he said, "It is happy, it re-sows, it will be eating the grass." So there's a way of talking about the plant, which is as if it was a person. And in the semi-structured interview, we're trying to preserve this mode of expression. On the question concerning the future of your farm, he answered, there will be industrial farming, subsistence farming, and here we're speaking about farming activities, farming, so we underline this word agriculture, farming. Subsistence farming plus a second profession. So agrotourism, which is part of the agricultural lexical field, and tourism. So I'm putting a line in the margin of both colours. So orange for farming activities and yellow for touristic activities. So we have a bed and breakfast. I underline that. If we had chosen another theoretical framework, we could have had a single theme. For example, there is a concept which is the system of activity in farming, which includes farming activities and annex activities. If we had had a column or a theme, activity systems, quite obviously these two keywords which are different colours would be of the same colour. But we chose to separate tourism because for the theme we know that tourism will be buoyant for the future, and so we make it into an entirely separate theme. So what I'm saying here is that the design itself of the matrix must be discussed, must be thought out. It is not necessarily exactly in line with the theme of the study that was identified when we studied the order and the problematics. It is the result of a reflection that includes these different themes of the study that come from the construction of the problematics and what we have heard in the 30 or so interviews.